Hello and welcome to the second video in a series designed to help out web development novices. Today we're going to be talking about how you can add styling to your web pages and how we do this using a language called CSS. Now, CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it is a language that browsers use to determine what style properties to use for your HTML elements. So in the last video we showed what an HTML element is, and we wrote a few ourselves. So in this video we're going to have a little go at applying some CSS to those elements, as well as just having a chat about how CSS works, when and why you'd use it. So the first question you might be asking is, why do we need a separate language to tell the browser how I want my HTML to look? Why can't I just use HTML itself? It's a good question, and in the early days of the web that's exactly what happened. We used bold tags, italics tabs, tables for positioning elements, and so on. However, as the web grew up, HTML just wasn't robust enough to accomplish the styling we wanted, as well as we wanted to get a lot of the benefits of what we call separation of concerns. So separation of concerns is a broader computer science principle or paradigm. It's a preferred way of writing software, and websites can follow this principle, and it has a lot of benefits. And so separation of concerns is the concept that you want to separate the distinct elements of your application or website into their distinct areas of functionality or purpose. In this way, people who are only concerned with certain parts of the functionality can just look at those. So if you're just interested in the styling, you can almost just look at the CSS. As well as that, it means that if you want to encapsulate it and maybe apply, in our example, the CSS to another HTML document later, that's much easier if they're already separated. There's a host of other benefits. So for our purpose in designing and building websites, separation of concerns generally refers to the separation between content and presentation, and that is the split between HTML and CSS. So here's what CSS looks like. In this example, it's in the same document as our HTML, and it lives within the head tag. So the style tag at the top will be within the head somewhere. And if we ignore that for now and look at the HTML, we can see that there's some new elements which are in this pink text. The ID equals, and then a name, and then the class equals and a name. Those are declaring things within our HTML so that when we write our CSS, we can select those elements to apply styling to. In the style tag, we have these things called selectors, which are defined by the hashtag page-title and the full stop main-article. And these selectors are selecting certain parts of the HTML to then apply the properties to, the properties being what lives between the curly brackets, so color, font weight. We can also select elements just by their element name, so we could select all the P tags in a document, we could select all the H1 tags, and don't want to get into it too much, but you can get more complicated in that you can select a certain ID that only lives within a certain type of element that has a certain class name and is nested one level deep. You can get extraordinarily complicated in selecting specific elements to then apply styling to. So these properties are probably one of the most difficult parts of CSS because there are just so many of them. A lot of them are to do with styling as you'd kind of think of it, so to do with color, font choice for text, opacity, things like that, and then a lot of the other properties are to do with positioning. So how your elements interact with each other, the spacing between them, how they interact when the page resizes, all those sorts of things. So best way by explanation is probably an example, so let's dive into that right now. So in our previous video, we used the NotePlay application, or text editor if you're on Mac, to do our code editing. This time I'm going to use a program called Visual Studio Code. It is just a text editor with some more advanced features, well, a lot of advanced features. Something I prefer using and is very popular right now in the development scene. You can use any other text editor. You can continue using Notepad, Notepad++, Sublime Text, brackets are all great options. I prefer to use Visual Studio Code, so you can download that by just typing in VS Code, download, and then choose one of your options. So I've already downloaded it, so if I open it up, it looks like this, and you can see I've opened the index.html file from our last video, and you can see it looks a lot different and a lot more readable because it's got this auto syntax highlighting that's showing me what are tags, what are attributes, what are values, and it's just a lot nicer to work with. So we're going to be working on this today, and the first thing we want to do is define the style tag where our CSS is going to live. So go into the head, open bracket, style, and then we're going to just put some space here that we can work in later. Now, later on, and for almost all of your projects, you're going to want to have this CSS in a separate file and linking it using what's known as a link tag. But since we're just learning about how CSS works for now, we're going to write it in the same document and it'll work all the same for this purposes. And later on, when we do more advanced websites, we'll show you how that works, having it in a separate file. So we've got the space where our CSS is going to live. So the first thing we need to do is decide which elements we want to style and therefore how we're going to select them. So just to add a bit of variety, I think I'm going to add some more text down here. So, hello internet, CSS is great. And then we're going to add a tag here called a span tag. And you see Visual Studio Code auto closes that, which is great unless you write it like I do. CSS is great. Now, we want to be able to style this great to make it more bold and more accentuated, but we don't necessarily want to style all span tags within this document. This is the only one so far, so it's fine, but if we had another paragraph here, for example, I don't know, that first. And this is also within a span tag. Then if we apply any styling to span, with span as the selector, it'll style both of these. And for this example, we don't want that. So I'm going to add what's known as an ID. So you do that by writing the attribute name equals and then the value. So we're going to call the value something that so we know later on roughly what it does. So we're going to call it accent text. So we've got our ID and our little span here. How do we select it and apply styles to it? Well, much like the document, much like these in the slides, we're going to go into the style tag and we're going to select it. Now, how you select it depends on whether you're selecting an element, an ID, or a class. So an element is obviously any element type. So if I was to write H1 and then put styling in here, it would apply to all the H1 tags. If you want to target an ID, you have to put a hashtag ID. And later on we talk about classes, which are the other main one. You need to put that, a full stop, and then the class name. And that is so the browser knows what you're looking for. So in this case we're looking for an ID, and the ID is called accent text. You then have these little open brackets. I'm going to just format it like this because that's my preferred way. And then how are we going to accent it? We're going to give it the property font, weight, bold, and you can see VS Code is auto-filling a lot of these options, which is why one of the reasons why it's so much more useful than a plain text editor like Notepad. And we're going to give it a different color. And we're going to define that color with what's called a hex code. Now, you don't have to memorize these. If you look online for HTML color picker, it'll show you a selection and you can just pick the color. I think I'll go for this. I'll go for an orange. You could also just write orange. I just want this particular color, so I'm going to choose that. Now we're going to save it. We're going to go to our website. So this is what it looked like previously. So since I've now saved the document, if I hit refresh, you can see it's added the second paragraph, and you can see that great has been accented. Perfect. So, what else do we want to do? Well, let's do something a bit broader. So let's apply some styles to the entire body. So essentially this is all content on the website. So what do we want to add here? Let's align everything to the center. Let's give the text color a dark gray, which is just a little less harsh than a black. I find it looks a bit nicer. Let's apply a margin, which I'll explain shortly. And let's make the font size a little bit bigger. I believe that's bigger. Okay. So, what is going on here? So everything contained within the body, aka the whole document, all the text within it is going to be aligned to the center, self-explanatory. The color of all that text is going to be changed. The margin, which is the area of blank space around the box that is the body element, is going to be squeezed in by 50 pixels. So it's going to be shunted down 50 pixels and in from both sides 50 pixels and from the bottom. That's just to give us a bit of white space, make the content on the page breathe a bit, and then we just chose a font size. So you may wonder, how is this color 3333 going to interact with this accent color? How do we decide which one overrules? CSS by design has a very strict hierarchy, and it has many rules, but in essence, the more selective your selector is, the greater precedence it's given. So in this case, an ID has more precedence than a general element selector. So it is given precedence. If they're of equal precedence, the one that comes last will just be applied. It's best practice normally to apply your broadest properties at the top, and that way there's kind of a natural progression, and you don't get too lost later on trying to figure out why one property is being applied and not another. So let's see how this works. I'm going to Control S to save, go to our document and refresh. There we go. Now we're in the middle. We've got a bit of white space at the top. Fantastic. Alright, what else can we do? Let's try just change the headings a bit, make it a bit nicer. So I'm going to apply something to the H1 tag, which we see down here as our heading tag. And we're going to change the font. You do that. Like so. Apologies. Excellent. So, what is happening here is we're declaring the family of fonts we want the browser to use for the heading tag in order of precedence. So if the user system has this font Arial Black installed, use that, then Gadget if not, and then the default system sans serif font. Let's also just add a little bit of margin to the bottom of the heading so that there's more of a distinct space between the heading and the text below it. Don't worry about these exact measurements, you get more of a feel for them as you go on. There are also lots of different types of values they can take, so they can be in pixels, they can be in things called ems or percentages. It's kind of an ongoing process. As you use each element, you'll look it up, find out what kind of properties, what kind of values the property can take. For the moment, you can just use these. So let's see how that works. Bang, nice and bold. Fantastic. All right, that's looking pretty good. Let's just select something else. Let's declare this one, give that an ID of second paragraph. And then we select it, as we did with the others. No, actually let's show something different. So we're going to give this a class, and we're going to call it quote. Now, why we put a class and not an ID? So an ID is generally used for denoting an instance or a specific object, whereas a class is used for denoting a type of object. So a quotation is a general type of thing. We might want to have many quotations within our document, so we'd use a class, and then all of the quotations will be applied with this styling, and that styling is going to be, so we select it first using the full stop this time, quotation, and we'll just give it a font style italic, like a quotation. And we should actually make this a quotation with some quotation marks. So this is a class. If this was a specific quote, for example, this is a quote by a particularly important person that we wanted to have different styling than the rest of the quotes, then we can use an ID, because it was a specific example we wanted to apply individual styling to it. In this case, because it's a type of thing, then we're going to use a class. So, see how that looks. Refresh again. There we go. We've added some basic styling. You know, this website's not going to rock anyone's world, but compared to how it looked before, I think it looks markedly improved. So, hopefully that helps you out. We'll see you in the next video where we do some very basic JavaScript to add a bit more functionality to this website.